Hello, Gino here, and you are listening to Otherworld Connections. We live in a critical time where now, more than ever, angels and fairies, hidden forces, are bursting at the seams of the veil to work with us. They want to see us change in order to save the world and live in service to others. So join me on a journey to empowerment and enlightenment with an angelic angle and a fairy focus, looking into ways to improve our current situation, morality, archetypes, solutions for self-healing, and spiritual sciences in light of theosophy and other occult traditions.
Hello. Welcome back to Otherworld Connections. In today's show, we are continuing our read-through of parts of a book of Rudolf Steiner. It's a collection of lectures by Rudolf Steiner called Bees, with an afterword on the art of Joseph Beuys, printed by the Anthroposophic Press. And yeah, it's simply just a collection of lectures he did on bees. And we were reading lecture 7, and we're going to finish that off. Got pretty close, and then we'll go on to lecture 8. And just a reminder that you can find the link to anything I read or refer to during the show. In this case, it's just this one book. And that's when it's published on my website, thesecretkindergarten.com, because I have another show for kids here on Revolution Radio Studio A, Saturdays, 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And we do a lot of fairy tales, because fairy tales are food for the soul, for the child. And I would say, just to segue into what we're doing here, I consider Steiner's lectures and writings and that sort of thing as food for the soul for the adult. Yes, so you can check out my stuff on all my things. Otherworldconnections.substack.com. It's a pretty good place to go. Odyssey, Rumble, YouTube, etc. And starting today, all going well, this will be published as video on the related sites. I'm not streaming live yet. I've got about 20 windows up. Hopefully all should go well. So yes, if you do catch this episode on YouTube or other places, it'll be video. And you can see my ugly mug on the TV and with the screen with the read-through. So, yeah. Let's see how that works out. So moving on, let's start finishing off Lecture 7. We've been, funnily enough, talking about ants. Let's continue. Let's now look at the agricultural ants that set up their little fields, where they grow and tend their plants very differently. It is true that a human being would not be able to exist on the amount of food they grow there. For if a human being were to try to eat these little rice kernels that are as hard as pebbles, the person would, first of all, become strangely ill from ingesting too much formic acid. But besides this, the individual would probably break off some teeth, so that a dentist would have to work hard for some time to repair them. After that, the person would experience a miserable death, all because of eating these pebble-hard rice kernels that the ants have prepared in this manner. But the ants, more accurately, the entire ant colony, says to itself, if we simply go out into the open fields of nature and suck out of the plants that substance which we find present everywhere, then we will not be able to create within ourselves sufficient formic acid, and as a result we won't be able to give enough to the earth, which depends on it. And this is a classic anthroposophical view, and it's Steiner's. This is very Steiner, what he's explaining here, and it's literally spiritual science. So if you've heard the term spiritual sciences, this is exactly what you're seeing here. He is basically explaining, scientifically, in a way, the Hermetic principle of vibration, the law of vibration, that states that we're all basically connected, right? And when you really understand that, things change. And things change. Because you're aligning with a natural law. You're aligning with a principle. You're understanding that's how things work. And that's that. It feels good. It feels good to know what's what. It really does. So where was I? I'm trying to remember to look at the camera now. But this is a radio show right now. Later, this will be the video. Oh my goodness. So we'll do it this way. We'll choose specific plants, which we will grow and harvest in such a way that the resulting food will be very tightly compressed. Pressed together so much that it becomes as hard as stone. And from this we'll be able to extract a large amount of formic acid. These agricultural ants do this in order to produce as much formic acid as they possibly can. And these particular ants are the ones that manage to put a lot of formic acid back into the soil. This is the connection I've wanted you to see. And there's that term connection, and that's why it's called Otherworld Connections. It's true. Because everything's connected. In this way, you will also understand that poisons, even though they create inflammations or similar conditions, also function as chemicals that have continuous curative powers that stave off the process of dying. You could also say that the bee, in particular, is extremely important in this regard. The bee helps maintain the existence of the flowers. It keeps them from dying out. This is why there is such a deep relationship between bees and flowers. This maintenance of life becomes evident every time insects move about, carrying on their activities on the earth. When this happens, I would like to say that the earth has had its store of poisons replenished, which means, of course, that death has been prevented and life has been maintained. This is the spiritual connection. When someone asks what the spiritual connections are, I never like to say that it is simply this or that way. But rather, I prefer to present the facts and then let a person decide, based upon the facts, whether the connections make sense or not. The facts are usually arrayed in such a manner that you will see that there is significance and meaning in all of them. Unfortunately, those who consider themselves true scholars don't really tell you this. But in life this does play a certain role. In the areas where we live, less respect will perhaps be accorded to all that I have said. But as you go farther south, you will hear farmers, simple people, say out of instinctive knowledge, "These ant colonies, you must not disturb them because they keep mold from becoming too destructive." And the very smart ones also say something else. If you go for a walk with them through the woods, where the trees have been harvested and young trees are beginning to grow, these people, using their noses, They are very smart with their noses. Walk through such an area and come to a place where they say, well, that's going to grow very well. The moldy odor is not as strong here. So there must be an ant colony nearby that is doing its job. This is what such people can smell, based on a finely attuned sense of smell. Many a farmer's saying has been formulated that has proved to be very useful. Unfortunately, our modern civilization has become too much of a brain-oriented culture, where the mechanical, abstract aspects of things are emphasized, much to the detriment of these instinctive methods, which now have become simply words and nothing else. And this understanding, just stepping out, this understanding of Rudolf Steiner is how he predicted, or it shows us his level of understanding that allowed him to predict what we're going through right now with AI and the Ahrimanic influence. We will be talking about the Ahrimanic influence at some point. Just don't spend too much time on social media. You. Try not to, because the Ahriman going to get you. And interestingly, I listened to the man, oh my gosh, his first name's Ken, and he has a channel called Theoria Apophysis, and he put out a striking video of his prediction of where AI is going to go in terms of how we behave in our consciousness. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because this is where Steiner says the mechanical, abstract aspects of things are emphasized. And what's going to happen is an emphasis on AI providing us with the answers. So it's going to be very mechanical. We're going to be, on one hand, we're going to be smarter in the sense that we're going to have answers for everything. But we're going to be really dumb because it's not us that came up with the answers. We might get the answer and then know it, but it's a mechanical, brain-oriented way of having knowledge, right? We're losing our heart, guys, and this is why I'm doing also Otherworld Connections. Ironically, broadcasting it over the internet, but hey. So all you people out there in 3D reality doing good, doing well, and connecting with people, and being a positive influence, well, good on ya. Just don't forget that there's a bit of that as well. You notice there's a theme of balance in the Otherworld Connections, and that's what I strive to do, and I am striving to do, is to achieve some more balance in my life. All right. Yeah, which have now become words and simply nothing else. So AI is going to give us words, as in, answers. Oh, what about this? What about that? Oh, well, I'll just check with AI. Here's some words, blah, blah, blah. It might be something really intelligent. We might remember that, which makes us have intelligent answers to intelligent things. But does that make us intelligent? All right. These creatures, specifically when they appear as collective groups, as in the beehive or ant colony, know all of this. This knowledge is obtained through a very special sense of smell. And as I've said, much of the instinctive knowledge that human beings have is based upon the intelligence of the nose. And Steiner finishes up by saying, next week we will continue this discussion. The main point I had wanted to make today is that bees, wasps, and ants do not simply remove something from nature, an activity that makes them appear to be robbers, aka, their food or whatever, from other plants. Yeah. They also give to nature They also give nature the possibility to continue living and thriving. Okay, the word that we all know, ecosystem, that springs to mind. Okay, so I hope, if anything, I hope this inspires you. It's inspiring me to, connect more with the bees. We've done more about making these connections, because making connections to the other living beings here on planet Earth builds up these otherworld connections, which is the thing that's, for lack of a better term, a hobby of mine, right? Doing intuitive stuff, and building up your intuition helps to direct you on your path in life that you're supposed to be doing your great work. There is crossover in the great work, the thing that people should do, and that is related to teaching natural law. That is teaching natural law, and under that umbrella is a very big, wide. There are lots of ways of going about it, and the reason there are lots of ways of going about it is the whole reason why we're all individuals and we're all different. And I don't mean it like some diversity is our strength thing. I mean that you're you. You're supposed to be you. And when you understand these principles of nature, these natural laws, things fall into place, and you now have a framework in which to go about doing things in your life. And you know what? People respond to that as that's a religion, and in a sense it is a belief system, but it's a belief system that doesn't come with the cognitive dissonance that all other belief systems come with, because it's truth with a capital T. It is. And you won't know until you know you know. So that's me preaching a little bit there. Lecture 8. Spoken, presented by Rudolf Steiner in Dornach, December the 22nd, 1923. Rudolf Steiner still rocking it after 100 years. Changing people's lives in 2025. All right. There was one other thing I was going to say. But yeah. For some reason, I'm finding it easier to make comments on the things I'm reading now that the camera's on. What's that about? Anyway. The other thing I was meant to do is, bear with me, just bring something up. And it's raining down here in New Zealand, Central Plateau, Central North Island of New Zealand. The rain has finally come. And Comet says, hi Gino. Hey Comet, so good to see you, dude. So good to hear from you. Thank you for all your hard work. Literally, my friend and, my peer, Comet, manning the chat room, the Element chat room for the Revolution Radio chat, and Comet is always there, giving of his time, literally 24 hours, guys, a day, to help make sure things are going smoothly on the station. So just another little plug for considering donating. I don't believe Comet gets any money from this. He just does it because it's the right thing to do. And anyway, we appreciate you, Comet. I appreciate you. And we appreciate all of the management working hard behind the scenes. Willow Andreasen works very hard. Everybody pesters her. Poor Willow. And she's always super responsive, super helpful for anything, and always updating and informing us about everything. And Willow even tells me when my clocks are about to go forward or back, all the way over in New Zealand. She tells me that. Talk about being pampered by Revolution Radio. Absolutely pampered. So voluntary work in service to other people and in service for the greater good is what it really is all about. And it just makes me feel great to be around or to be associated with people that have that drive. And I hope that inspires that drive in you. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, let's move on to Lecture 8. Good morning, gentlemen. I got this feeling I really wished I was around then and I got to be at a lecture. What an exciting time to be alive, an exciting place to be. Imagine the energy in a place like that, and then there'll be questions and people will just shout them out. That energy of people trying to get knowledge and stuff. Anyway, it's not that it's not around anymore, but come on, you get what I mean. Good morning, gentlemen. We need to continue speaking about Mr. Dollinger's question. I lost that question, but we're going to get the answer, and we'll know what the question is from that. He had posed this question for you, and I'm sure all of you will find this to be of interest, of what the connection is on a spiritual level between the entire horde of insects that goes to the plants and that which is in the plants. You see, gentlemen, I said earlier that everywhere around us are not only elements such as oxygen and nitrogen, but there is present throughout nature also intelligence and understanding. Nobody is astonished if you say, we inhale the air, because the air is all around us, and because the scientific explanation that is now printed in every school book tells us that air is everywhere, and that we breathe in this air. But I have known, for example, people out in the country who thought this was a figment of the imagination. They simply didn't know that air is everywhere. The same way that people today don't know that the power of mind is present around us in nature. They are the ones who consider it a bit of fantasy if you say that in the same way we inhale air with the help of our lungs. We also inhale this power of mind, for example, with our noses and ears. And I've given you numerous examples by which you can see that the power of mind is present everywhere. We've actually done an episode on smell magic, on how scents and smells can affect other people's perceptions, feelings, responses in your presence. And I've given you numerous examples by which you can see that the power of mind is everywhere. I think I just read that. Last time we spoke about a particularly interesting chapter of natural science about bees, wasps, and ants. Perhaps there is no better place in nature to obtain such a thorough insight into the workings of nature than in the activities of insects. This just makes me think of that mushroom trip I had that time. I've had a few, but that time, the one that made the neighbors put their house up for sale. I don't know, but if you've taken a lot of mushrooms, as in you haven't eaten for 3 days and you're at the Pizza Hut buffet, lot of mushrooms, oh my gosh, that was pretty stupid. But whatever you meet, that's an insect. So I can't help but think that. And now that I'm reading this thing about ants, I think it was an ant that I met. Well, that ant did not want to meet me, but that's a whole nother story. Oh my goodness. But my account is similar to everybody else's account which is even more weird. Insects just happen to be truly remarkable creatures, and they will in the future still reveal quite a few secrets to us. It is worth noting that we are discussing insects at the same time that we are celebrating the 100th anniversary of the famous scientist specializing in insect research, Jean-Henri Fabre, who was born a century ago on December the 22nd and lived at just the time when materialism began pervading science. For this reason, he interpreted everything materialistically. But he did bring to light a great many facts about the life of insects. For this reason, it is natural that we think of him as we discuss insects today. First, I would like to give you an example of a type of insect that you will find interesting because of its connection with bees. A bee achieves a high degree of perfection in the work that it accomplishes. The most remarkable thing about a bee is not that it produces honey, but that it can produce completely out of itself, out of its own body, these wonderfully constructed honeycomb cells. It has to carry into the beehive whatever it uses as building materials. It works in such a way that it doesn't use this material in the original form, but rather brings it into the beehive already completely transformed. The bee does this all by itself, and what it creates comes directly out of itself. And I just want to step out and say this is why we have an ongoing bee segment in my kids' show, Revolution Radio, Saturdays 2 p.m. Eastern. Get those headphones out for the kids. It's much better than screen time, and it's more engaging, more sensory, and your child, your preschooler, will sit and pay attention for a longer period than they would in front of the television, believe it or not. Insects, I think, are also here to educate the kids about this connectedness, this law of vibration. And let me rephrase that, because this is misunderstood when people use the term teach. This is actually an affirmation for kids. So insects are here for the kids. They're an appropriate size, and so on and so forth. Okay, for kids to observe. Kids are more connected with this sort of stuff than us, naturally, because they're operating from the original brain, their subconscious mind. Their conscious mind is developing at a fast rate, but is not developed fully yet. So yes, the whole point of my story is I just wanted to again plug my show for the kids. And why? Because I've noticed that people don't understand what the heck that's all about. Because the whole point is you're not supposed to explain these things to kids, you explain them to adults. The kids show, it's just the stuff, right? Fairy tales, stuff about bees. It's all very, well, what the heck's this guy doing? Well, this is what I'm doing. And then I'm putting it in the context of kids. Okay? Okay. So, we're going back to the lecture now. There is, however, another genus of bee, which doesn't accomplish its tasks in the same way as the common honeybee does. The unique method employed by this bee demonstrates the tremendous power of mind or intelligence that exists in all of nature. Let's observe for a moment, the work methods of this type of bee, normally called the wood bee, and not as highly regarded as the common honeybee because it can be a nuisance for human beings. I'm just going to adjust my seat. Because I am sinking on video. Oh my goodness. See, that's the problem. Now I've gone to video, there are more distractions. Oh. Okay, it's the wood bee. This is an extremely industrious bee. A bee that must really overcome difficult circumstances in order to ensure its survival. Not the survival of the individual bee, but of the entire genus. This animal looks for wood that no longer is part of a tree, but has been cut and processed for use elsewhere. You can find this wood bee with its nests, which I'll describe for you shortly, anywhere you have a wooden plug or peg that has been hammered into the ground or somewhere else. Such pieces of dead wood as serve to hold down tents or to create wooden columns, and also wooden garden benches or garden doors that can serve as likely nesting sites. Excuse me. Okay. In there you'll find the wood bee. Alright. Imagine that this is such a post. And Rudolf Steiner draws on the blackboard. I wish I was there. This is also wood that no longer serves as part of a tree. Now along comes the wood bee and drills an entry hole into the post at an angle. When the bee makes it all the way into the center, has removed all the excess wood pieces, and has enlarged the entrance to become a bit more like a channel, it begins to drill in a completely different direction. It drills in such a way that a small ring-shaped chamber is formed. Then the insect flies away, brings back all sorts of materials from nearby, and lines the chamber with these wadding materials. When it is finished, it lays an egg in there, from which a larva will emerge. This egg lies there in the chamber. After having laid the egg, the little bee makes a lid, in the center of which there is a hole. It continues drilling above this lid and fashions a second chamber for another larva to use as its living space. After having lined the chamber with wadding, laid a second egg, and provided a lid with a hole in it, the bee continues to the next chamber, and so on until it has made 10 or 12 such chambers, one on top of the other. In each one there is an egg. And we have the diagram on the video of the show that I'll upload later. Ooh. They look like two vertical channels inside. They go in and down at an angle, maybe like you're putting a nail in the wall for a picture frame. And once they get into the wood, it looks like they go vertically. With horizontal chambers. Anyway, let's just keep going. Okay, in each chamber there is an egg. The larvae can develop inside the wood. Into each chamber the bee has placed food for each larva. The larva eats the food that has been prepared for it and grows until it is mature enough to crawl out. But now the time comes when the insect changes into a chrysalis, then becomes a bee with wings and wants to fly from the nest. When this mature insect wants to leave the nest, it must depart via the original entrance corridor. Here we see evidence of the cleverness of the wood bee. in that the mature insect can leave the nest using the passageway that had been drilled out first. That's fine so far, but when the second insect, which is younger than the first, and then the third, the egg of which was laid even more recently, and so on, want to leave, these later insects, for whom living quarters were constructed later by the mother bee, will not be able to find an exiting passageway, because only one such entrance or exit was drilled out. An awkward situation now arises, because those bees confined to the upper chambers would be doomed to die eventually, since there is no easy way out for them. Yeah, I think they're horizontal channels on a vertical line. And I think they'd have to zigzag all the way through to get out. The mother averts this catastrophe by creating the little holes in the lids, which the younger insects can find, and through which they can let themselves drop before crawling out of the main entrance. The bee from the third egg, after it has developed sufficiently, drops through the two holes made for the lower chambers, where the previous residents, who are older and have already matured and then escaped, no longer live. In this way, the younger insects do not disturb those in the chambers below, which are now empty, since the insects once there have matured and left. There is never any contact between them because the older ones are not there. You see, the entire nest The entire nest has been planned with such great wisdom and foresight that you can't help but be astonished. When people today mechanically try to reproduce things, they are usually created in imitation, but the result is often not as skillfully made as nature would do it. Things as they exist in nature are created with extraordinary skill, and you would have to admit that there is definitely evidence of intelligence and understanding. You would find hundreds or even thousands of examples to illustrate this point by examining how insects build and how they act when they are at work. Just consider how much knowledge and understanding is evidenced by the agricultural ants in the agricultural operation that I told you about recently. We also observed another matter as we were looking at these bees, wasps, and ants. I told you that these creatures have a substance in them that is poisonous, and that this poisonous substance is, at the same time, an excellent medicine, if the proper dose is determined and prescribed. Bee poison is an exceptional medicine with curative powers, as is wasp poison. And formic acid, which ants secrete, is an even better medicine. And I've indicated something else to you. We can get this formic acid by disturbing an anthill, collecting the ants, and then squeezing them. Mainly we obtain formic acid from ants, but if you knew, relatively speaking, how much formic acid is in this hall, you would be very astonished. You would say, "We certainly can't look for an anthill here in a corner of this hall." Gentlemen, just as you sit there, you are truly an anthill yourselves. For everywhere in your arms and legs, muscles and other tissues, heart, lung, liver, spleen, everywhere you'll find formic acid. So there's Rudolf Steiner again. You are an anthill. And that is the way he saw and understood things so deeply. To be sure, I've got to get my page turning correct. To be sure, it's not as concentrated or strong as you'll find in an anthill. but even so you are completely saturated with formic acid. Yes, this is something very strange. Why do we have this formic acid in our bodies? You can determine whether a person has too little of it. If someone appears before you with an illness, actually most human beings are just a bit sick. This person might have any of 100 different illnesses that all look alike externally. You need to recognize what this sick person is actually lacking. The fact that a person is pale or unable to eat, these are only superficial signs. You need to determine what it is that is really lacking. With some people, it is simply that they don't have enough of the anthill in themselves, that they don't generate enough formic acid. The same way in which the anthill produces formic acid, the body must make formic acid all over, but particularly in the spleen. If a person produces an insufficient amount of formic acid, such an individual needs to be given a medicinal preparation, a remedy by means of which you help externally create enough formic acid within the body. But it is important to notice the changes that take place in a person who just happens to have too little formic acid. These observations can only be made when those who wish to observe these matters truly have a thorough understanding of human nature. You need to create a clear picture in your mind of what is going on in a person's soul. A person who, at first, has had sufficient formic acid within, and then later has too little of this substance. This is truly remarkable. Such a person will tell you, if you ask in the correct way, the right things about the illness. Assume, for instance, you have before you an individual who tells you, after being inspired, to think along certain lines. Several months ago, I could remember just about everything. I could think back and reflect on past occurrences very well. Now I have trouble with that. I don't seem to be able to do it anymore. Every time I try to think back, I just can't remember. Gentlemen, this is often a much more important indication than all the results of external medical tests can give you. Tests that you naturally should also undertake. Today you can test urine for the albumin content, for pus, for sugar, and other constituents. And you'll get rather interesting results. But under certain circumstances, it can be much more important that a person describes a symptom such as suffering from memory loss. For when an individual tells you something like that, you will naturally have to obtain more information. And then you might come to the following conclusion. In the most recent period of this person's life, the level of formic acid in the body has decreased to the point of becoming insufficient for supporting certain important functions. Now, someone who still thinks on an external level could say, this person doesn't have enough formic acid within. Either I'll squeeze some ants to get formic acid, or I'll create it synthetically in a laboratory. Then I'll administer formic acid in an appropriate dose. You can do this for a period of time, but the patient will come to you later and say, but this stuff didn't help me one bit. What is the situation here? It really doesn't help the patient at all. The diagnosis was absolutely correct. The person didn't have enough formic acid in the system. You administered formic acid and it didn't do any good at all. So what do we have going on here? You see, if you research this matter, you'll discover the real explanation. The formic acid doesn't help a particular individual, but with others it is always successful. After a while, you begin to notice the difference. In the case of those patients whom the formic acid helped, you will find that they show evidence of a mucus obstruction in the lungs. The other patients who derive no benefit from the formic acid as a medication are those in whom you will discover mucus obstructions in the liver, kidneys, or spleen. This turns out to be a rather peculiar situation. There is a great difference between an insufficient amount of formic acid in the lungs and the same situation in the liver. The difference exists by virtue of the fact that the lung can immediately use the formic acid that comes from an ant colony. But the liver can't do anything at all with it. And now here is something else, gentlemen. If you notice that a person has a problem with the liver, or specifically the intestines, and formic acid doesn't help at all, then you'll have to dispense oxalic acid. That means you'll have to press the juice out of the common wood sorrel, or from clover that grows in the fields, derive the acid from it, and give it as medicine. So you see, if a person has a problem with the lungs, you need to give formic acid. If a person has a problem with the liver or intestines, you have to give oxalic acid. The strange thing, however, is that the person whom you give oxalic acid will, after a certain amount of time, begin to produce formic acid within. What's really important is that you don't simply administer from outside the patient things that you want the patient to take as medicine, but rather you really must know what the human organism will do with this remedy on its own. If you give formic acid, then the organism will say, "That's not for me. I want to do the work by myself." In this case, you administered the formic acid already prepared for the body to use directly. There's no work involved in it for me. I'll not get it up into the lungs. Naturally, you have to give this medication in such a manner that it will go into the stomach. In the end, it will get into the intestines. At this point, the human organism tells the body that it is ready to do its work. What are you giving me here? You mean to tell me that I'm not supposed to create formic acid by myself first, but that you want me to take this formic acid that you put into the stomach and convey it to the lungs where it is needed? No, I refuse to do it. The human organism really wants to have oxalic acid so that it can transform it into formic acid on its own. Yes, gentlemen, life involves work, not substances. And the most important thing to know is that life doesn't consist at all in simply eating cabbage, turnips, or beets, but rather in what the body must do when the cabbage, turnip, or beet substances are taken into the digestive system. In any case, the body must not produce cabbage all over again from the cabbage that has just arrived in the digestive system. Very good point, right? This is remarkably the very thing that is at the basis of our present day civilization. And there's a plus, there's an argument there, right, for eating vegetables, and eating your greens. And it takes a nod at, vegetarianism, right? Or veganism, which is in consideration of the same principle that he's talking about here, which is the law of vibration, that everything's connected, right? So if we are connected to the animals, then, well, should we hurt them? Should we kill them? What are we doing to ourselves if we're doing that? But anyway, I don't want to really preach about that. But I just got to say that's the best argument I've ever come across for eating your greens. And I just like how there's that connectedness, and he uses food to bring us to these understandings of our connectedness with things. Also, how powerful and magical our digestive system is. All right. Oh, we've got 2 minutes left. Okay, we're not going to be able to wrap up this chapter. Okay, last paragraph. Here we go. But you'll see from this example what an unusual relationship exists within nature. Out there are the plants. The clover plant has been defined in the German language in a very special way. Kleesor, which literally means acid from clover. But actually, clover acid, or oxalic acid, is found in all plants. It is simply that its greatest concentration is in the clover plant. That's why, when we're juicing, I would always take out the bits of clover that were mistakenly in there. I can just leave them in. That's why we talk about clover acid in German. Just as you will find formic acid. In German, this is called ant acid. Hey, ant acid. Or acid from ants. Since ants supply it in concentrated form. Everywhere in nature and everywhere in the human body. Likewise, you will find everywhere in nature and in the human body, Kleesor, or oxalic acid. Now here is another very interesting fact. Take the following experiment, which we don't have time for, so I'm going to leave it there. Page 81, we got a fair way through lecture number 8 of Rudolf Steiner. Very compelling. I'm always compelled by his work. Sometimes those explanations start going down a rabbit hole and I get very confused. I find multiple visits to the same lecture or article by Rudolf Steiner tends to help, and ruminating and contemplating on that. And just one little thing is, what was I going to say? Using Otherworld connection strategy, for lack of a better term, it's just something we've uncovered in the show, is that before I went to sleep at night, I was wondering, how am I going to present these lectures in a way that links to the point of, that links to something that has more substance in what Otherworld Connections is all about. And then I woke up this morning thinking of how we are all connected, and that this lecture in particular, these lectures in particular, highlight the fact that we are so connected to the bees and how important bees and other insects are, and that we should live in consideration of that, or an awareness of that. So hey, thanks so much for tuning in, guys, and check out the channels, YouTube and stuff, because it's going on video now, and we'll see you at the next one. Much love, everyone. See you later.